The NBA doesn't warn you when it's about to rip something away. One minute, you're celebrating the birth of your first child, believing you've earned your place in a city you gave everything to. The next minute, your phone buzzes and your entire life is boxed up and shipped across the country. No countdown, no loyalty clause, just business. This is the cold, unforgiving reality of the NBA, and no story exposes it more brutally than the Ivica Zubac trade. For nearly a decade, Zubac was the quiet backbone of basketball in Los Angeles. He wasn't the loudest name. He didn't chase headlines or controversy. He showed up, protected the rim, set hard screens, and did the dirty work stars depend on but rarely get credit for. While superstars came and went, while banners were promised and windows slammed shut, Zubac stayed. Reliable, professional, loyal. And that's exactly why this story hits different. Because when the Clippers finally found momentum, when the locker room felt stable, when Zubac was playing some of the best basketball of his career, the league reminded everyone of one brutal truth. Stability in the NBA is an illusion. Performance doesn't guarantee security. Loyalty doesn't guarantee protection. Timing doesn't care about your personal life. Hours after becoming a father for the first time, Zubac was traded. No press conference, no farewell tour, just a transaction line scrolling across screens while fans refresh their phones in disbelief. One moment he was a Clipper, a fixture in LA. The next, he was a contract, a moving piece, an asset headed to Indiana. This isn't just a trade story. It's a human story hidden behind salary caps and draft picks. It's about how the NBA can feel glamorous from the outside, but ice cold on the inside. And if this can happen to a player like Ivica Zubac, it can happen to anyone. Before we break down how this deal happened, why the timing was so devastating, and what it reveals about the modern NBA, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? East Coast, West Coast, Europe, Asia? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you're watching from the US, type 1. If you're watching internationally, type 2. And if you appreciate deep, real NBA stories that go beyond box scores, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. To understand why the Zubac trade felt like a gut punch, you have to look at the timing, not just the transaction. On paper, it was just another NBA move. Names exchanged, picks added, salary matched, but context is everything. And the context made this one feel ruthless. The Clippers were finally rolling. After months of inconsistency, injuries, and outside noise, the team had quietly turned a corner. The chemistry between veterans had stabilized. The rotations made sense. The defense looked connected. Over a 20-game stretch, they were winning at a rate that put them among the league's most effective teams during that span. This wasn't a franchise in panic mode. This was a team finding its identity. And at the center of that identity was Ivica Zubac. He wasn't just filling minutes. He was anchoring possessions, contesting shots, cleaning the glass, communicating on defense. Night after night, he absorbed the physical punishment so the stars didn't have to. While headlines focused on marquee names, coaches and players inside the league knew Zubac was quietly having one of the most complete seasons of his career. That's what made the decision so shocking. This wasn't a move born out of desperation. It wasn't a rebuild signal. It was a calculated, cold-blooded gamble by a front office willing to disrupt continuity in pursuit of long-term assets. Picks, flexibility, youth, the currency of modern NBA thinking. And this is where the league draws a hard line between people and portfolios. From a basketball standpoint, you can argue logic. Draft capital extends windows. Younger players offer upside. Contracts can be flipped again. But from a human standpoint, the message was unmistakable. Your value ends the moment someone believes they can replace you with potential. For Zubac, there was no warning sign, no dip in minutes, no tension in the locker room, no sense that his role was in jeopardy. He was doing everything right. And still, he was expendable. That's the side of the NBA fans rarely see. Not the buzzer beaters or highlight reels, but the moments where stability vanishes without explanation. Where players learn, sometimes in the same breath they're celebrating life milestones, that they are never truly settled. And once you recognize that pattern, the Zubac trade stops feeling isolated, it starts looking like a symptom of something bigger. The part that made this trade sting wasn't just basketball. It was the silence. No buildup, no rumors gaining traction, no slow leak to prepare the player or the public. 1 minute, Ivica Zubac was planning life as a Clipper with a newborn daughter in his arms. The next, he was packing for a city he hadn't chosen. In the NBA, trades are announced like numbers on a spreadsheet, but the emotional fallout lingers long after the notification disappears. Zubac didn't just lose a jersey, he lost routine, community, familiar faces. A support system built over nearly 10 years in the same organization and city. Los Angeles wasn't just where he played basketball. It was where he grew into a professional, where he learned the league's pace, its politics, its expectations, where teammates became family and staff became constants in a career defined by movement. That kind of continuity is rare in the NBA, and when it exists, players cling to it. That's why the timing felt almost cruel. Hours before the trade, Zubac became a father for the first time. A life-changing moment that redefines priorities, responsibilities, and emotional grounding. In any other profession, that moment is protected. Respected? In the NBA, it was incidental. This is the unspoken rule of the league. Personal milestones don't pause the business calendar. Behind closed doors, players know this. Veterans warn rookies early. Never assume comfort means security. Never assume performance equals protection. The Zubac situation became a stark reminder of that lesson, broadcast in real time. And yet, what made this moment even heavier was Zubac's reputation. He wasn't controversial, he wasn't demanding trades, he wasn't leaking frustrations. He was known as steady, low maintenance, professional. If the league can move someone like that without hesitation, it sends a message through every locker room. No one is immune. When players talk about the NBA being a business, this is what they mean. Not the contracts or endorsements, but the emotional detachment required to make decisions that fracture lives while improving balance sheets. And once that line is crossed, there's no turning back. The Zubac trade wasn't loud. It didn't dominate headlines for weeks. But in its quiet brutality, it may be one of the most revealing moves of the season. If you want to understand how deeply this trade cut, look at the reaction inside the locker room. Not from executives or analysts, but from the players who shared the grind with Ivica Zubac every single day. Their responses told a story the transaction log never could. Teammates didn't react with shock. They reacted with emotion. For many inside the Clippers organization, Zubac wasn't just a center. He was a constant, a stabilizer. Someone who brought consistency to a franchise that had spent years chasing it. When stars rested, when lineups shifted, when systems changed, Zubac adapted without complaint. That kind of presence builds trust, and trust doesn't disappear quietly. One of the most telling reactions came from a teammate who had formed a close personal bond with Zubac. Their connection went beyond basketball. Similar backgrounds, similar journeys, long road trips, shared meals, late-night conversations after tough losses. Those relationships are what players lean on in a league that demands constant adjustment. When that bond is cut without warning, it leaves a mark. The response wasn't anger aimed outward, it was disappointment mixed with acceptance. Players know the rules. They've seen it happen before, but knowing something is possible doesn't make it easier when it happens to someone you respect. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Moments like this create quiet fractures in team culture. Not dramatic blow-ups, subtle shifts. Players start holding back emotionally. Trust becomes conditional. Attachments weaken. Because if loyalty didn't protect Zubac, why would anyone believe it would protect them? This is the invisible cost of aggressive roster management. You can't measure it in analytics or draft equity, but it exists. It changes how players invest themselves in a franchise, how they view long-term promises, how much of themselves they're willing to give beyond the court. For younger players watching, the message was clear. Professionalism is respected, but it doesn't buy immunity. Stability is temporary. The only certainty is uncertainty. And once that mindset sets in, the NBA stops feeling like a league of teams. It starts feeling like a marketplace. Efficient, calculated, emotionally distant. The Zubac trade didn't just move a player, it shifted how people inside the organization viewed the idea of belonging. From the outside, the trade was framed as strategy, future assets, flexibility, long-term vision. Those words sound clean, almost comforting when you repeat them enough. But inside the league, players hear a different translation: replaceable. This is where the NBA's cold logic becomes impossible to ignore. Ivica Zubac wasn't traded because he failed. He wasn't moved because he declined or became unplayable in high-leverage moments. In fact, the opposite was true. He was delivering exactly what contenders crave from a modern big man: defensive reliability, physical toughness, low-ego execution, and night-to-night consistency. Yet, in today's NBA, being solid isn't always enough. Being dependable doesn't always align with being desirable. Front offices are no longer rewarded for patience. They're rewarded for leverage. Draft picks represent possibility. Younger players represent upside. And upside, even when unproven, often outweighs proven value in executive decision-making rooms. Zubac's stability became less attractive than the idea of what might come next. Not what existed, not what worked, but what could be flipped, repackaged, or leveraged again. This is how players become line items. What makes this dynamic especially brutal is its invisibility. Fans argue about winners and losers of trades without ever acknowledging the psychological toll on the people involved. The NBA markets itself as a brotherhood, a family, a culture-driven league. And in many ways, it is. Until it isn't. Zubac's situation highlighted the gap between messaging and reality. Teams talk about loyalty, development, and trust. But when opportunity presents itself, those values are often negotiable. The league doesn't punish emotional detachment, it rewards it. And players know this. Every veteran has a moment where the illusion cracks. For Zubac, this was it. A reminder that no matter how long you stay, how well you perform, or how quietly you do your job, your future can still be decided in a room you're not allowed to enter. That realization doesn't just change careers, it changes mindsets. When the trade became official, the conversation quickly shifted to fit and numbers. New system, new role, new expectations. That's how the NBA processes change. Move forward immediately, don't linger, don't look back. But for the player involved, there is always a pause the league doesn't acknowledge. For Ivica Zubac, that pause came in the form of distance. Distance from the city he called home. Distance from teammates who understood his rhythm without words. Distance from a routine that had been built slowly over years of repetition. In the NBA, routine is survival. It's how players stay mentally grounded while everything else is unstable. When that routine disappears overnight, the adjustment isn't just physical, it's psychological. The league rarely talks about that part. Zubac wasn't walking into a new opportunity. He was walking into uncertainty, a different locker room culture, different expectations, different communication styles, different pressures. And all of it happening while his personal life was undergoing its own seismic shift. Becoming a father changes how you see risk, how you process instability, how you define security. This is the moment where the business of basketball collides with real life. Executives move pieces with clarity. Players absorb consequences with resilience. But resilience doesn't mean immunity. It means learning how to compartmentalize loss while performing at the highest level in the world. That's the unspoken requirement of staying in this league. What Zubac experienced is something every NBA player recognizes, even if fans don't. The understanding that your career is portable, but your life isn't. That relationships, homes, and identities are treated as secondary variables. That adaptability is not just a skill, but a necessity. And once you've been through it, you're never quite the same. The trade didn't end Zubac's career. It reshaped his perspective. From that point on, every contract, every promise, every reassurance carries an asterisk because the lesson has already been learned. What often gets lost in trade discussions is how moments like this ripple far beyond one player. The Zubac trade wasn't just a lesson for him, it was a warning shot across the entire league. Every locker room noticed. Veterans saw it as confirmation of what they already believed, but rarely say out loud. Younger players saw it as a preview of their own future. Coaches felt it too, caught between preaching culture and watching it get overridden by transactions they don't control. The NBA likes to sell continuity, but the reality is that continuity survives only when it aligns with leverage. This is where the emotional armor starts to form. Players begin to separate themselves from cities, from long-term narratives, from the idea that a jersey means permanence. They still compete, they still care, but they stop anchoring their identity to a franchise. Because the Zubac situation proved that even doing everything right doesn't guarantee anything tomorrow. And that shift matters. It changes how players negotiate contracts. It changes how much of themselves they invest in communities. It changes how openly they speak in locker rooms. The NBA doesn't just shape careers, it shapes behavior. And trades like this accelerate a more transactional mindset across the league. What's striking is how quietly it happens. There's no public rebellion, no dramatic statements, just a subtle recalibration. Players learn to keep bags half-packed, mentally, if not physically. To prepare for exits even when everything seems stable, Zubac's story became one of those internal reference points, a name players bring up privately when talking about loyalty, timing, and reality, not as a tragedy, but as evidence. Evidence that the league moves faster than emotions, faster than personal milestones, faster than gratitude. And once that understanding becomes universal, the NBA becomes exactly what it claims to be at its core: a business first, a family second. From a purely strategic lens, the Zubac trade fits a growing pattern in the modern NBA. Front offices are no longer building around stability. They're building around optionality. The ability to pivot quickly, accumulate assets, and stay flexible has become more valuable than maintaining chemistry or continuity. This is where analytics and emotion collide. Zubac represented certainty, a known floor, a dependable presence. But certainty doesn't excite spreadsheets. Potential does. Draft picks can be moved. Young players can be packaged. Contracts can be reshaped. Certainty, once locked in, has limited maneuverability. And in an era where timelines change overnight, that rigidity becomes a liability. This is not a moral judgment. It's a reality. The NBA has evolved into a league where decision makers are incentivized to think 3 moves ahead, even if it means sacrificing what's working now. The Zubac trade reflected that mindset perfectly. It wasn't about today's rotation. It was about tomorrow's flexibility. But there's a cost to that approach. When teams prioritize assets over anchors, they risk eroding trust at the foundational level. Players understand strategy, but they also feel displacement. They know when a move is purely transactional, and when enough of those moves stack up, culture becomes fragile. The league doesn't track that stat. Zubac's departure symbolized more than roster change. It symbolized the philosophical shift that many teams are embracing, sometimes without fully acknowledging the long-term impact on morale, loyalty, and identity. The question isn't whether this approach works. It often does. The question is what it turns the league into: a faster marketplace, a more efficient ecosystem, and a colder environment for the people inside it. As the dust settled, the Zubac trade stopped being about one center and one franchise. It became a mirror, a reflection of where the NBA is headed and what it now demands from the people who give it everything. The league loves stories about loyalty when they end in championships, but it rarely talks about loyalty when it ends in relocation. Zubac's situation exposed the imbalance in that narrative. Loyalty is celebrated when it's convenient. When it's not, it's quietly discarded. And yet, this isn't a story about villains. Front offices aren't evil. Executives aren't heartless. They operate within a system that rewards detachment and foresight, a system where hesitation is punished and sentiment is seen as weakness. The NBA didn't become this way overnight. It evolved here, step by step, move by move. That's what makes stories like this important. They remind fans that behind every trade graphic is a human reset button, a family adjusting, a routine shattered, a sense of belonging redefined. These moments don't trend, they don't lead highlight shows, but they shape careers just as much as points and rebounds. For Zubac, the chapter didn't close. It turned. His professionalism didn't disappear with the trade, his value didn't vanish. But his relationship with the idea of permanence likely did. And that's the quiet consequence most players carry forward. The NBA will keep moving, trades will keep coming, and stories like this will repeat under different names. The only question is whether fans choose to see them as transactions or as turning points in real lives. The Ivica Zubac trade leaves us with more than debate. It leaves us with perspective, not about wins or losses, but about what it truly means to survive in the modern NBA. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. In a league driven by speed, flexibility, and leverage, stability is temporary. Loyalty is real, but it is rarely reciprocal. Players are asked to commit fully while knowing, deep down, that commitment does not guarantee protection. That contradiction is the emotional tax of professional basketball. For teams, the takeaway is strategic but human. Asset management wins seasons, but trust sustains cultures. When continuity is sacrificed too often, the cost shows up quietly, in guarded locker rooms, in cautious relationships, in players who perform but no longer attach. For players, the lesson is survival through awareness. Invest in your craft, protect your inner circle, separate identity from uniform, understand the business without letting it erase your humanity. The league will keep moving. Your values must move with it, not disappear beneath it. And for fans, there is responsibility too, to look beyond trade grades and ask who absorbs the impact, to appreciate consistency as much as upside, to remember that every roster move rewrites someone's life, not just a depth chart. Zubac's story isn't tragic. It's truthful. It reveals the NBA exactly as it is, not as it markets itself. A league of opportunity, brilliance, and relentless motion. A league where resilience isn't optional, it's required. If this story made you see the NBA differently, support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with another basketball fan, and subscribing for more real, unfiltered NBA stories. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts on the Zubac trade. Do you see it as smart business or a failure of loyalty? Type 1 if you believe the NBA did what it had to do. Type 2 if you believe loyalty still matters.